The Pew Research organization recently released a poll that revealed Americans' attitudes toward NASA, the emerging commercial space sector and space exploration in general. While the study contained a lot of interesting information, much of the media focused on the fact that more people believe that studying climate, 63%, and mitigating against asteroid impacts, 62%, should be a top priority than those who believe in going to Mars, 18%, or back to the Moon, 13%. The top priority question elicited a number of hot takes in the media. Ars Technica proclaimed that NASA's priorities appear to be out of whack with what the public wants. Mashable reported, Americans aren't sold on the idea of sending astronauts back to the Moon. The Houston Chronicle, the hometown newspaper of NASA's Johnson Space Flight Center, added, Americans don't love the thought of NASA going back to the Moon. Study shows, in fact, these headlines are, at best, misleading. While the Pew poll does suggest that Americans are more enthusiastic about climate and asteroid studies, it does not indicate that they oppose sending astronauts to the Moon and Mars. When one combines the answer, important but lower priority, with top priority, then one finds that a healthy majority of Americans favor sending astronauts to Mars, 64%, and going back to the Moon, 55%. NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, Jim Frederick Bridenstine Overnight Defense, Pentagon asked to prep housing for up to 20,000 migrant children. Senators move to block F-35 transfer to Turkey. Trump Mar-a-Lago trips cost Coast Guard. NASA's unnecessary $4 million lunar orbit project doesn't help us get back to the Moon. SpaceX is not a threat to NASA. Moore pointed out this fact in a tweet. The Pew study states that a majority believe it's important to send astronauts to Mars. To be a world leader in space exploration. We are committed to maintaining a balanced portfolio that includes both Earth science. Just 7% of Americans have heard a lot about NASA and the activities of private space companies in the past year, while 20% have heard nothing of these subjects. The rest of Americans fall somewhere between these two extremes. The figures are particularly shocking considering the potential of both NASA and commercial space activities to change human civilization in the coming years. Clearly, NASA has some work to do. A number of constituencies need to be convinced of the necessity of returning to the Moon, including Congress, the public, and the media. Bridenstine is doing his part, informed no doubt by his experience as a politician. He has an active Twitter feed and has made himself available to the media more frequently than many of his predecessors. However, it should be noticed that the author of the Return to the Moon program, President Trump, Donald John Trump, got lawmakers preparing to vote on bill allowing migrant children to be detained longer than 20 days. Report Wasserman Schultz, infants separated from their parents are in Florida immigrant shelters. Ex-White House ethics chief, Sarah Sanders' tweet violates ethics laws. Moore has been low-key about one of his signature initiatives. Indeed, he issued the JFK example and did not announce the program with a high-profile speech, but instead a signing ceremony at the White House of the executive order for NASA to go back to the Moon. The Return to the Moon program is not under threat now. However, for astronauts to walk the lunar surface again 7 or so years hence, the meme that Americans do not want it to happen cannot be allowed to take hold. Trump, therefore, needs to do a Kennedy and make the speech. I can imagine Trump making his Back to the Moon speech later this year, say on a campaign swing through Texas. He could rent out Rice Stadium, and fill it as only he can, to ram home the Kennedy Association. After Trump mentions his support for Ted Cruz, Edward Cruz Senate left in limbo by Trump tweets. House delays the Hill's Morning Report, sponsored by PHRMA. Immigration drama grips Washington Senate. Gang of 4 to meet next week on immigration. More and various other local politicians. He can segue into his Back to the Moon program. He should make sure that his arguments are comprehensive and uplifting. The event will be well covered by the media and will likely be carried live by the cable networks. The idea of including space in a high-profile speech, and many others in the future, would be to keep the issue of space in the public consciousness and to incite discussion on social media on the subject. By doing so, the president will ensure that, this time, people will actually walk on the moon in the near future, and that the third proposal to start American astronauts exploring deep space does not die on the vine as have the previous two. Mark Whittington is the author of Space Exploration Studies: Why Is It So Hard to Go Back to the Moon, as well as The Moon, Mars and Beyond.